Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our September HRC meeting. Can we just quickly take attendance before we get this thing going? Finn, Emmy are running late. I'm not sure about Bud. Nate will not be joining us tonight. And Jen, do you know if Carrie's coming?
She is coming, but she said to me 7:30. I said, nope, 7. So I think she'll probably be coming in.
Did I know that it's here too?
I did tell her that too. Yes.
So there may be some people.
Okay, so when I call your name, could you please just respond that you're here? Marlene,
Here.
Amelia,
Here.
Jen.
Here.
Cynthia,
Here,
I am here.
Oh, hi, Bud.
Hi,
Taking attendance. You're here.
okay, I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not there, but I'm here.
Hi, Belinda. You're here. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is a conversation on policy. That's a very loose way to describe what's going to be happening tonight. We are joined tonight by Superintendent Gutekunst, Liz Lee, and Andrea Longo from School Committee, Mary Lammy, who is Assistant Superintendent for Student Support Services. Am I missing anybody from NPS? Okay, so this group is going to present, and then we're hoping that we can really have a good discussion, engaging discussion about sort of what's happening with the state of policy right now, in particular with regards to a lot of the DEI work that's happening in the schools. So I will turn it over to you guys. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina. Thanks, everybody. Good to see everyone. School year started. Welcome back and all that. Thanks to Andrea, our chair, and Liz, our vice chair, for being here. On the screen, I have a presentation I want to go through for you. And what precipitated this are some conversations that Tina and I and HRC had over the summer. And an expressed desire to understand a little bit more about how policies impacting children and their families and handbooks are created, why they're created, and the implications for those policies, particularly as they relate to active bias that may occur in school, or acts of hate or discrimination. So that's kind of the frame here. If you'll be patient with me, this is a little bit of policy 101, but I hope it'll be helpful.
Okay, can I ask a question before you
Yes.
start? I'm taking notes and will you share your presentation so I don't have to type?
Yes, it's $3.
The town will pay for that.
I do. So the focus here really is how do we make sure there are equitable practices and policies in the Dayton Public Schools. I'll begin with this, and I realize that our friend, we can't move that up. Well, it's hard to know where to put that little. Yeah, let's just, well, yeah, there we go. That'll be all right. So we as a district are responsible for developing policies and procedures that really help with the management and conduct of our students and supervision of their students. And those policies begin really with federal law, which kind of really is a focal point, the foundation, and then state law, and then school committee policy. All of those working together shape what is in our student handbooks and what is in the school committee policy handbook. It's not any one, but all three working together to make sure that we have procedures in place to support our students. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail and a lot of law, and I'm not a lawyer, but I do want you to understand the complexity of some of the policies and laws that impact how we set up school, particularly at the federal level. So a variety of laws, and they've been around for decades, some of them. The McKinney-Vento Act, for example, dictates how we will manage and support homeless students. And there are homeless students in the Dayton Public Schools who attend our schools. And there are specific rules and procedures that we must follow to make sure that they're properly educated. The Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, is one that is probably in some ways confuses families and students and even the superintendent every once in a while more than others. And broadly speaking, that protects the privacy of all students and all of their data and all of their records. So that they cannot be shared without permission, broadly speaking. And Mary Landy, who's here this evening, is an expert on all of these laws. And so I may defer to her if there is a question. Title IX, which many of us have heard about, prohibits discrimination based on sex in education programs. You hear a lot about that regarding athletes and in college and high schools. IDEA provides students with special education program that free and appropriate public education or FAPE is a really important concept because it states, regardless of who you are or whatever your disability, you are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. Regardless of who you are, regardless of how you present yourself, the public schools are required to educate you. Section 504 is a little different, related to IDEA, but it provides rights for people with disabilities. If you have, regardless of what the disability may be, physical disability, it might be emotional disability or mental disability, we have obligations to provide for our students and our staff, by the way, who have a disability that manifests itself in a way that may get in the way of their life's work, which in the case of students is schoolwork. And then finally, the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and in all of the school programming. Sometimes these things conflict with one another, but they all are intended to provide a framework for us to support our students in school. Now, state laws also impact what we can do in schools. For example, Mass General Law 71 very specifically authorizes local and elected school committees to be the only ones to establish educational goals and policies in the schools. It's not that responsibility is not given to town meeting, for example. It's authorized at the school committee. And then the legislature has implemented some other laws, some more recently. An act relative to bullying is a very detailed act that describes how schools will act, respond, prevent bullying, define what bullying is. It has a very specific definition. And how we must respond to it and how we also have to keep track of it as well. I'll talk about that. An act relative to hazing, another thing we've heard recently in the news, something I think happened at BBC with the swim team. The swim team yesterday, men and women's swim team has been put on hold because of some current hazing on the collegiate level. And another King Philip Regional High School football team, they discovered that there might have been some hazing at a summer camp that has put that program under investigation. So that's something that we take seriously too, and it's also something that we have to prevent and report. And then there are several laws in regards to student discipline. And these all very detailed, long, and they outline what we must do if someone misbehaves in school, from bringing a weapon to school, being violent in school, to misbehaving in a classroom, to saying something offensive to another student. It's all part of state law. And all of these, again, state and federal laws work together. Now, the Needham School Committee has policies as well that amplify and hopefully, I think they do complement federal and state laws. For example, and the way this is set up, SC is school committee, the school committee has policies that are lettered. They go through I, J, A, and they outline different procedures and programs in the schools. These are all on our district's website. The instructional program, the Needham Public Schools, is probably one of the most important ones because it outlines what the school committee expects of the education of our children. And it lists 5 competencies from a portrait of a Needham graduate that we expect of our students. I won't get into all of that right now, but it is a policy that we expect, for example, our students to be strong communicators. We expect them to develop an anti-racist attitude and to have those experiences. So that policy is outlined in the Needham School Committee policy. We also have a policy about teaching about religion. We do teach about religion. We don't proselytize, we don't convert. But we do talk about the history and culture of religion in our schools. And some of the challenges with that. Another policy, instructional materials, make sure that there are appropriate books and materials that are available, they're accessible, relevant, culturally appropriate, and inclusive. That is important to our school committee. And then also there is a policy most recently adopted around how we select library media resources. And if there is a challenge to a particular book, we've all heard about that around the nation, how will the school committee and the administration respond to a challenge to a book? Now, these are not, there are no federal or state laws around these items, but the school committee has taken upon itself to say, well, we want to take what the federal and state laws are, and we want to strengthen what we're providing for our students by having these policies in place. So those are the three areas: federal, state, and school committee policy that are important. Now, how does the school committee make policy? How does that come about? The first really step, and these are generally in order, but they sometimes might go out of order. First one is that a suggestion for a new revised policy is shared with the school committee. That could be from me, it could be from our legal counsel, it could be from the student advisory council at Needham High School. There are students who are part of the school committee. There's a member who sits on the school committee, Leah Groom, who is a senior, and she's a representative of the Student Advisory Council, and they sometimes provide some ideas and input into handbooks and policy. And after these ideas are promulgated, or I may suggest that there is a policy that needs updating or a new one, the school committee will then assign its policy subcommittee to discuss that policy and make a recommendation to the full school committee after they've had a conversation about what it should look like. They go through a lot of wordsmithing, right, Andrea? And real detailed conversations, and they argue over word use and choice and all that. And at the end of the day, they come up with policies that they can present to the school committee. There we go. Okay. The third step really is that the school committee discusses, and all this is an open session, the drafts of policies. And then the school committee has at least 2 public meetings to have those policies out there. That includes handbooks. The handbooks, by the way, really are a manifestation of many, but not all school committee policies. Policies that are in the school committee's policy handbook, if you will, it's online, find their way into our student family handbooks. And then after they are discussed by the public, then they are voted on to be supported. And after a handbook is voted on, then the document is posted and handbooks are shared with families and staff. And in fact, families are required to sign off electronically that they've received the handbook. Ideally, we want them to be signing off saying they've read every single word. Right, Tina?
Yeah.
Yeah. Practically speaking, we're everyone's doing the best they can, but they acknowledge that they've received it and they have that resource available to them. Now, how do we further share and implement the policy? This is a busy slide, I apologize. But a couple things you need to know that are important. We require our staff every single year to go through mandated training where they review the policies, many of which I just discussed, and some other ones that I didn't discuss. And sign off that they understand them. Or we'll have discussions about them. Sometimes we'll bring in lawyers or we'll bring in other resources to share with teachers and staff what these policies mean and how can they best be implemented. Every fall, I send out a letter, or we otherwise communicate with families about these policies and other school procedures for families to be aware of, and to get those resources. And then in the fall, principals working with their teachers review these policies and procedures with students. Now, as I won't put Finn on the spot, but as the students get older, it's kind of like when you're on an airplane and the stewardess is demonstrating the seatbelt. Seniors might pay as much attention to that, and putting you on the spot. However, that's how it goes. However, we do try to make those lessons developmentally appropriate for kids, so they understand what it means to, for example, use a computer wisely and in a smart way that's safe for a first grader or second grader. And as they get older, the reminders and the policies and procedures are done through advisory, responsive classroom, which is an opportunity for younger students to work together with their teacher to talk about important topics. And then sometimes assemblies and announcements. And then throughout the year, there continue to be assemblies or important announcements, community meetings, classroom lessons that focus on a variety of things, particularly belonging in school, inclusion, anti-bias. And all of these, again, all of these topics are aligned with the Portrait of a Needham Graduate, which is the North Star for the Needham Public Schools and the school committee, the direction we want to point our families and our students in. And as I said, our staff receives throughout the year ongoing education and training. Sometimes things happen, we receive extra training, depending on what it might be. But those are the ways, there's some of the ways that we share this information with our staff, with their families and the students. I'm often asked, and I thought I would just share this, what are some of those programs and the practices that occur in our schools that show we're really trying to be equitable and inclusive. This is really a very small, snapshot of what's happening. But let me just share some of the big ideas here. To support our students and to engage them, we do have student affinity groups. These affinity groups are not exclusive. They're not exclusive for example, the Gay Straight Alliance at the middle school is open to all students. The Muslim Student Union at Needham High School is open to all students. All of our groups, all of our affinity groups and clubs are open to all students. Students, particularly as they get older, they naturally kind of sort where they want to participate and who they want to interact with. That's just natural, normal, and developmentally appropriate. But those groups do exist. This is just the list is this long, the different groups. There's school programming at all levels. Social emotional learning beginning in preschool really and continuing in kindergarten. We have implemented a racial literacy curriculum that I think is in its third year, Mary. That begins in kindergarten, is developmentally appropriate, goes through 5th grade, and then we're working on one of the next steps in middle school. In high school, thanks to the great work of Joanne Allen Willoughby, Pierre Jean, Leslie Smart, who is now in Lincoln, but also Beth Finals, who is here in the audience. The Courageous Conversations on Race is a course that students take for credit that allows them to have conversations about race, understand its impact in the world and what it means to be anti-racist and what it means to talk about race and have uncomfortable conversations. And then they go into classrooms and talk to our students, 9th graders, about what that means. So we're providing that for all of our students, that opportunity to have conversations that will make them understand some of the differences and feel welcome and included. Other programs are Unified Sports Program for students with developmental and physical disabilities. Mentors like me, providing opportunities for students to have a mentor from a staff of color, so that they can really feel that they can see someone who looks like them and can work with them and mentor them through school. And then another program that's we're very excited about, Free Universal School Lunch. It's not particularly an anti-bias program. However, I will tell you, there are a significant number of students in Needham who require free and reduced lunch, and a few hundred. However, now it's offered for all of our students, so students are not worried about asking or being revealed, if you will. So with the state's backing and the school committee's encouragement, that program is out there. Summer programming happens for both our Boston resident students for the METCO program, Summer Bridges for students who need some additional academic support, and then for some of our special education students who need additional learning and time throughout the summer. It's also important that, there are things that happen in school. Sometimes bad things, sometimes annoying things, but there are times that things happen that have to be addressed. I often share with people that we have about a little over 5,600 students, maybe 5,000 families, something like that. Don't quote me on that. And all of those kids and those 5,000 different families with different faith traditions, political persuasions, ethnic, cultural, even language backgrounds. They are all descending into our schools. And it's the responsibility of the teacher working with the principal. Try to figure out how we're gonna have everybody get along, work together, learn from one another, support one another in an environment that feels safe and secure. And that is no small task. In particular, I think, in my view, over the last few years, when the world out there, and we're not immune from the world, is toxic in many ways, and the discourse and social media. So it's a challenge. How do we bring children together, all of them, regardless of how they present themselves, whoever they are? We don't check students at the door and say, you know what, you're from the wrong family. If you could, there might be a different school you could go to. Or, you know what, we're not taking gay students today. If there's another community you could go to, that's what you have to do. We take all of our students and we do the best with them because that's our responsibility. And these laws and policies help guide our work imperfectly. And often they're problems. But that's our work, that's our challenge, and it's one that we do because we're passionate about it. So sometimes things happen. Sometimes kids act in a way that is unexpected, is offensive, is inappropriate, and needs to be dealt with. And so some of the things that we do is that involve things like a mediated conversation between the students or staff who are impacted. Could involve restorative circles or conversations, which might be a larger conversation with the group that's been impacted, to talk about what happened and why it happened and what we can do to move forward. Might involve counseling, something as simple as that. Needing Youth Services is a huge partner with the Needham Public Schools. And they really are, they're just like, they're amazing that this community has that resource and the support they provide. They also provide, with the police department, a diversion program, because sometimes students' behavior could be not only inappropriate, it could be illegal, vandalism, for example. And we don't want to be sending kids in a pipeline toward juvenile facilities or juvenile court. We can avoid it. The diversion program is a way that the Needham police have been brilliant working with Needham Services to avoid that. So those are some of the things that we do to address behavior that is inappropriate. And I say this as alternatives to traditional discipline because there is traditional discipline as well. There are detentions, there are suspensions, at the worst case, expulsions from the Needham Public Schools, depending on behavior. And for those more extreme things, expulsions, that's really we're talking about someone who's violent with a weapon. We're talking about somebody who's assaulted a staff member. So we're, though, in a position where we can focus more on mediation, restoration, counseling, and diversion, rather than coming down and sending them away. But it is a tool at our disposal, and it is one that we've had to and we will use. And I'm unapologetic about that if the behavior requires a more traditional approach. The Race Equity, Access, and Leadership Coalition, the REAL Coalition, provides some leadership and guidance on all of our programs. We're excited about the work of the REAL Coalition. We have about 55 community members, staff members, and students who are part of the REAL Coalition. And some members here are part of the REAL Coalition, and they help try to guide. They're not directing all the work, they're not doing all the work, but they provide some feedback for us and some learning that we try to do together to make sure that our schools are places where all kids feel that they belong. Equity teams are also a way that we think about in school, a school basis, how we can support our students and provide atmospheres and environments that are inclusive and welcoming. I'm also excited that I think most of our PTCs, not every single one, and it's a work in progress, have a diversity team as well, which is great because that's the work, racism, homophobia, bias is not a school thing. It's not a school phenomenon. It's not as if you walk into the schoolhouse and all of a sudden you're a bigot. It is, I hate to say it, the human condition, but it certainly goes beyond the school walls. And yet in the school, what can we do? We want to be able to control what we can control. But we can't just keep talking to one another, teachers and principals and students. It has to be broader. So the fact that there are parents on our PTCs that now say, yeah, we want to take some of this work on. We want to do this with the parent community. That, I think, is going to complement and strengthen the work that we're trying to do in the schools. The last thing I really want to talk about is, so you're doing all these things, you have all these rules. Well, how the heck do we, how are you held accountable, Mr. Superintendent or Madam Chair of the school committee? And how do you evaluate you're being effective? I do want to spend just a brief amount of time on this because we actually, unlike a lot of areas of government, the schools are highly regulated. And we are constantly watched. For example, we go through what is called a tiered focus monitoring review from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. This happens about every 2 years, can happen more if the Department of Education feels it's necessary. And they come in and they scour, they literally come in and look at files, they go into files, they visit classrooms, they interview folks around special education, how we're teaching English language learners, and whether or not we're in compliance with civil rights, all those rules I talked about earlier. And they spend a lot of time telling us where we're doing okay and where we have some hiccups. More recently, and the most recent report is on our website, which we received, I think, in June, Mary, I think it was May or June. Yeah. Which is a focus on special education in ELL. They have different focus. And ELL, there are some areas that they have some questions for us. For example, they want us to do a better job of translating letters to families for whom English is not their first language. We've struggled with that because you're sending out so much information, and then you're like, hey, this is not going to hit the mark for all these families. So you're playing catch up a lot. But the department said, we want to see evidence that you're going to do better. And they're going to come back and say, what did you do? They don't just tell us, can you recommend you do it? They say recommend, and you have a timeline. So that happened to the schools. Comprehensive review, we completed one last year. We were one of the first school systems to have one, I think 1 out of 16. The comprehensive review covered all areas of school operations. I believe they interviewed the school committee for that. They interviewed administrators, teachers, students, parents. It covers all areas of operations, from policymaking to finance to your curriculum program, to programs around equity. In fact, this past review was focused on equity and how are you making sure that your schools are inclusive. And again, it's not, well, we're coming in and we're just looking around and taking off and sending you a nice report. They want results. And so we have to deliver. MCAS, some people love it, some people hate it. It's a system. The results came out yesterday statewide. Our Needham results will start to roll out, but we are held accountable for those results. And every school is identified whether or not they are meeting benchmarks. And if they're not, we have to come up with a plan to make sure that we are pushing students in the right direction. Every high school student has to pass the MCAS in order to graduate. We've been really successful with that. But not because it's not a lot of work, it is. However, the state very clearly is focused on how are you making progress, particularly for students who are special education, who are students of color, who may be underrepresented, and for socioeconomically challenged students. It's not a matter of here's the test, here are the results, and share them with the community. Now come back to us with a plan for how you're going to get better. We also are involved with the Student Opportunity Act. That also requires us every year to monitor our school progress around discipline, around attendance. And if we have a disproportionality, if we have a disproportionate number of students, for example, students of let's say Black boys who are being suspended in the 5th grade, we have to report that. Why do you have that? What are you doing about that? How can you improve that? Those are all things that we have to do. We have to report to state. By the way, in this last piece, all of this information more is posted to the state's website. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has a page called School Profiles. And within that, all of this information, some of it is in different pages on the website, but under School Profiles, you can look up a variety of information about the Needham schools at every school in the Commonwealth, because we're required to submit it and that it is publicly available. There's no hiding it. There's no, our discipline records are up there, our attendance records are there, not for individual students, but the aggregate. And it's out there for families to see, to talk about, to understand. Each school has a school council, and that school council is charged by law to help the principal monitor the school improvement plan. At the high school level, they're also charged with looking at the student handbook and making recommendations for improvement. They're also recommended to help the principal shape the budget. We do some of that in Needham, probably not the most, but budgets are always tricky things. However, our principals do spend a lot of time on developing school culture and how they can improve academic achievement with their school councils, and also how the student handbooks can be improved. We are surveying staff and families regularly. We surveyed parents last spring. We're going to continue to do that annually, and some of the questions include academic, how we're doing academically, but also how are you doing as far as meeting your children's needs? Do they feel that they belong? We're looking at those results by race, by gender. We're looking at them by special education status, so we can better understand subgroups and what we need to do. The Metro West Health Survey results is another area that's just for grades 6 to 12 that talks about students' health needs, and where they're at, and whether or not they feel, for example, they've been bullied, or whether or not they feel that there's an area that requires some of us be thinking about in the health curriculum, student safety, for example. Again, all of this is shared with the public and we shared broadly with the community as well. We do have different community groups we work with. The Real Coalition I mentioned, I'm meeting regularly with the PTCs, Metro Parents. The CPAC is the Special Education Parent Advisory Council, which we are required by law to have. We have a great CPAC in town, and they work with school administrators to understand some of the issues around special education students programming. LPAC is the English Language Learners Parents Advisory Council. That's a new group. It's kind of nascent and growing, but another group that we're required to have to make sure that we're hearing the voices of those families for whom English is not their first language and helping to support the program. Finally, the school committee every year approves district goals and reviews our progress toward the achievement of these goals. We are accountable, the administrators, teachers, we are accountable ultimately to the school committee elected by the community. And they ask us, how with these goals, why did we have these goals, and how did we progress, and what are we going to do in this area where we didn't progress? So all of these working together within the context of developing policies and handbooks really is how we try, again, maybe imperfectly, but how we try to make sure that our schools are equitable, that they're inclusive for all of our students, and that we are trying to provide the best education that we can for them. So, Madam Chair,
Thank you. That was
I
great.
just wanted, and I will also say that we are here to respond to all kinds of questions. Mary, Andrew, and Liz, be happy to do that.
Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, you want to start?
Marlene?
Yeah, so when you talked about policies, you listed the different people can bring the policies, and then it's open to the community. But it didn't look like community members could bring a policy. Is that
So,
correct?
no, it's not correct, and my slide probably wasn't as articulate as that. You know what, I'm gonna toss that to the chair of the school committee.
So, we get emails from community members all the time, and oftentimes they'll ask a question that then prompts us to sort of have a conversation maybe with Dan or with one of the assistant superintendents about a particular thing that's happening at the schools, and sometimes that will eventually lead to a policy change. So I think perhaps an example would be a few years ago, there used to be a policy where if your lunch balance was negative, the child got a cheese sandwich basically until their lunch balance was brought up to 0 or positive. And one of the members of the school committee, I think, was doing some research and said, this is really not okay that we're lunch shaming kids whose parents can't afford to fill their lunch bucket for whatever reason. And so that sort of was something that came up, I think, a little bit from the community, also from the school committee member, was discussed, within the school committee's policy subcommittee about, we need to make this change, then, so the policy committee made a recommendation to the school committee, it was talked about, and then it sort of goes through the chain, but I think a lot of times. Community members, and it's mostly parents, will tend to ask a question that then sparks a conversation where we say, well, where is this covered? How is this covered? Do we think it warrants a change? Yes or no? And it's sort of a discussion that way.
I think it also happens when, with your meetings, you have, the first 5,
Right.
10 minutes of public participation. Where family members, sometimes, community members, parents, students come forward and say, hey, I have an idea, or I have a problem, or I have a suggestion. And although that problem will not be resolved right then and there, at least it does, the chair may then, turn to me and say, oh, is that something we can discuss at a later time, or whatever it might be. So there, I think those, at least
Right.
those 2 ways, that community members can share ideas.
Yeah, another example, I remember a parent came and talked about, bus fees for, parents who, might be divorced or, shared custody, so that they may be picked up, Monday and Tuesday at one house and the rest of the week at another house, but the parents were paying 2 bus fees, and so that was something that came about from, that was directly, I remember she came
Okay,
and spoke.
yeah.
At public comment, and so then we, looked into it, and now that's no, families pay 1 bus fee, not 2 anymore.
And it is part of your policy now. So
Right.
yeah, that's a recent kind of.
Thank you.
Dennis,
Yeah. Um, Thanks for giving us a chance to be part of the meeting. It's very helpful. The presentation is great, definitely more than $3.
Right, Marlene, you're up.
Okay, so I think first of all, it's not a question but a statement. It's like I'm here on behalf of Chinese Friends of Nina. Since the incident in the last school year, I think we sent emails to Dan regarding some of the proposals of what we're looking for to improve the procedures or protocols. And thank you very much for the feedback and support from various groups, including not limited to NDI, NRN, Clergy Association, and Human Rights Committee, of course, and also Dan reached out to put our rep on the real coalition also. So, but I think we're back with the new year. We are happy about like we can be making progress in the summer to have a joint working group to work on this all together. This is great. This is what we exactly look. I think we are heading in the right direction. Unfortunately, things can be. I hope things can happen faster. So one of my questions about policies, like if from a proposal perspective, if somebody make a proposal or change of a policy, like usually what's the time span, how long does it take to be between this discussion starts until it actually roll out with a execution?
I think it's highly variable. I mean, I
Sure.
think, we will, certainly when questions come up or people say, why don't you do it this way? Or have you ever thought about trying this? That's sort of a discussion, and depending on, exactly what the nature of the issue is, that might be sort of a 1 or 2 sort of conversations, or it might be a longer series of conversations that involve a larger group. It sort of depends on the particular thing. So I mean, it could be,
What's the worst scenario?
I mean, it could take multiple school years, depending on,
Oh, wow.
the type of issue. I mean, some of these
Okay.
things are more complicated than others, particularly ones that might have a financial impact.
Oh.
And what I've found is that oftentimes something looks sort of simple on the surface, but then if you really sort of peel back, there are a lot of other things that it might impact or hit or interact with that you have to be mindful of. And so we are probably slower than a lot of people would like to get things done, but it's also, it's in some ways, it's like, I think we're very careful, particularly if we're gonna make a policy change, to make sure that it's really well thought out and that it's something that's not going to have unintended consequences.
Sure.
If I'd add to that, Madam Chair, that it's also policies are meant to, policies can change. But once you vote on a policy, it's something that provides guidance for school administration. And it's meant to be pretty solid. and thoughtful and ready to stand the test of time. It's not something you say, oh yeah, you know, we passed that last month, but we got it all wrong, we're gonna do it again. It really doesn't happen. Some of the policies in the school committee's handbook go back to 1990. There's one that's 1984. But they're still relevant. And I looked at them and I thought, wow, you know, maybe that should be updated because it's 2023 and, you know, I was 21 at the time. But it's a still relevant policy. Don't ask me which one this is, but I'm thinking about this lately. Most of them have been updated. However, I would say that it's the ones that have financial implications usually take longer because we have to budget for them. The lunch program is one that took a little longer. Policy that may impact the handbooks are looked at every year. And language in the handbooks, which is school committee policy, change annually. So there's a quicker turnaround time in the handbooks that there are in some other policies that might take a little bit more lead time. So I think if I may, and it's just to jump to the point, one of the things I learned from the conversation that we had at Broadmeadow last spring, as a result of the incident at Broadmeadow, that the Newton Public Schools in their policy and in their handbook has some very interesting language around how a school responds when there's an act of bias or racism. And I think in one email or another I shared, I really like this language, and it's my expectation that this language is something, working with Mary, we can propose to the school committee. Because I think we're actually in many ways doing what it says, but we're not explicit with families about it. And we don't want families to be guessing or not understanding. If we can spell it out and be clear about what we're doing when something happens, I think that's important for families to know.
Yeah.
So that can happen more quickly, and yet still goes through the process of being discussed publicly and voted.
Yeah, just a thought on this is, I understand it because there's multiple scenarios, right? So we're talking about different levels of severity versus the different approaches handling it. In terms of communication, there might be another direction or perspective of it. So one thing is like, the bigger policy need the 2 public hearings before it actually can be decided, right? So one question is how often that public hearing will be hosted, and second is like, when we come to a difficult policy issues, can we take a kind of a spiral kind of approach and say, hey, we take a first step of this, so this is something we come up, we think it will work, but we don't know, can we run this with a pilot and then try it out? But we reserve the right to modify it if we find there's something wrong with it, right? So is that something?
Well, so let me sort of, I want to address your question, but I think it's made me realize there's sort of also, there's a difference between a policy and sort of operating procedures at the school level. So the school committee sets sort of like overarching policies. And then the schools will sort of put together, you know, okay, the policy says there's no discrimination. The policy says, you know, at a high level, this is how we expect our students and our staff to behave. But then, you know, each school sort of has a different protocol for sort of putting that into practice, depending on the ages of the students and the particular, you know, situations or, you know, things that might arise at the school. So that's where I think one thing that we have to keep in mind.
Can you help us with an example of, you know, we have policy around
Sure.
student discipline, for example, or student records or whatever. And then we have to have procedures inside the schools to enact the policy. What's an example of it?
A very real example around discipline is we absolutely have policy. It's pulled right down from federal and state guidance, and we have our discipline procedures in place. Under all of that is how does school operate on any given day? One of the elementary principals and I have been talking over the last 2 weeks about office referrals. So sometimes students are referred by a teacher to the office because of some kind of behavioral challenge that they might be having, that after many attempts, the teacher's not able to handle on their own. Our conversation has been about these incident reports and referrals to the office and how are they made and what's the threshold for an office referral at your school versus the school across town, what have you, and we're recognizing that we can be a much more consistent and clear about our expectations, not only for kiddos and families, but also for our teaching staff, and that helps to know how to do professional learning and things like that. So I could change that tomorrow if I felt that, we had the information to do that. I don't have to wait for policy
Oh, okay.
change. So there's a lot of those kind of moves that happen in collaboration. I often will get a call because a principal will want to be sure they're not overstepping on a practice that they want to put into place in their school. So that's one
The
example.
policies are meant to provide very clear guidance and a bottom line. This is the bottom line. But then it's the same policy for a kindergartner as it is for a 12th grader. So now it's up to the school to decide how are we going to implement this for a first grader versus an 11th grader? And that's the judgment. And those are easier to change because we may learn things. We may say, you know what? A restorative conversation with the whole class because something happened in the classroom. That's probably not going to work in this situation. We're going to try this. Policy just says you have to do something. The something is what the educators have to figure out so that it can have a meaningful impact on kids.
And just
I have a question. I have my hand raised. As far as the elementary schools, is there parity as to the way all of them operate? Obviously, the middle schools are different, the high school is a little different in the way they're implemented. But I think, not being a parent of a child in the Needham school system, that the parents would want there to be basically parity amongst, for example, all the grammar schools, would treat these situations the same way. And I'm just curious, do the principals get together and discuss these types of things?
So the answer I'll answer backwards is yes. Principals are actually together this morning discussing some of these issues, and Mary and I meet with them regularly in different forums, particularly at the elementary level. We have an elementary leadership team, and that the plan there is to make sure we're trying to do two things, and it's a challenge. We're trying to make sure that school committee policy and curriculum are implemented consistently throughout the district. Because we do not want a first grader at Broadmeadow to leave first grade going into second grade with a very different experience than the first grader at Newman, because they all end up at High Rock. So we want students to have consistency and coherence in their programming. Does it work perfectly? No way. There are 5 different elementary schools. They have different needs. For example, we have to make adjustments for curriculum program at Mitchell because of the building and its size than we do for Sunita Williams, which can do many different things because of its new building and of its opportunities. However, we still purchase the same curriculum materials and the same resources, and coaches, instructional coaches, for example, work between those buildings. So to make sure that we have some consistent practices, and yet there are things that are different. The John Elliott School is our most diverse school. And so there are some different ways that the principal there and the teachers there are thinking about implementing policy that may be different than, for example, at Mitchell or Newman or Broadmeadow. However, the answer is yes, they do work together. They strive to be as consistent as possible. And I will also say that there are times when a matter at one school, for example, around race, is handled differently at one school than it was at another. I'll be perfectly honest to say, yes, that happens. I will also say that in my 18 years as your superintendent, ever since we implemented more recently a policy around transparency, around acts of bias, we are more consistent in our approach in how we communicate and how we deal with students who may be the victim of an incident of bias. That was not the case. That was not the case 10 years ago, but it is the case now, and there's work to do.
I can add, I'm so sorry. I just want to add really quickly,
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Sure.
That at the elementary level, this school year is either our second or third year where we have the same elementary handbook that we collaboratively put together. And it looks a little bit different per school, as Dan was saying, because Elliott needs one dismissal procedure and Newman needs another dismissal procedure. So there's certainly procedures that are very specific to the physical plant or size of the school or what have you. But that was some really important work that we did.
Very
in an
intentional work
effort
to pull it
create
together.
cohesion.
in
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, I'm not sure if I've introduced myself before. My name is Lynn. I've been in Needham for over 10 years. Both my kids are born here, going to Broad Meadow. I'm here supporting, representing CFN too. So thank you. And thank you, Dan, for the presentation. I wanted to follow up with your question because you brought up a good point about the Newton protocol. And now that we understand the policy, a school policy needs to be consistent, but the school's protocols can be different. So about the Newton protocol, like from your perspective, is that a policy change to Needham Public School? Or that can be more realistic to suggest that to the school protocol changes?
It's a fair question. I'd have to be honest too, I haven't looked at that in a couple of months, maybe because other, summer and all that got in the way. So I have to look at it again. It's a fair
Okay.
question to see if there's something we can do.
We would love to understand that
Yeah,
because it,
yeah.
it sounds like the protocol can be changed really
Yeah.
fast. Yeah.
Well, I want to be
relatively.
quite, well, yes, because remember what I said too, is that
Yeah.
we launched the school year. To
Right.
try to share with students and to try to be consistent. People like, you said it
Yeah.
was this and now it's this, which is it?
Absolutely.
So we
Yeah.
want to try to make sure that we're rolling things out in a way that is, thoughtful and makes sense.
Yep.
One of the things, this is getting very granular. Would you bring donuts for all of us, Ellen?
I have, some French press.
Oh. All right.
Yes.
Um,
Not much.
One of the
good.
things that I recognize in the, what I'll call the, I don't want to call it the Newton protocol, but the Newton, this section of the Newton handbook, well, I'm not sure what section it is. The language in there actually mirrors a practice that we have around communicating with families. That communication with families is a memo that I created with our principals several years ago, and that is posted on our website. It's not part of the handbooks, but it's in fact a practice that we have. And what the Newton handbook said to me is, well, why don't we just incorporate it into our handbooks, because we're already doing it. And their language is elegant, so why don't we just cut and paste with Newton's permission and school committee's blessing, put that in there, because we're doing this work already. Let's be clear with parents, because I think some parents are like, what's happening? Or how does this work? So I think we're doing basically what Newton's outlined. I think we need to be clearer about it, and that's my intention to do it.
Then I really appreciate that. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, so my experience, and I think within Needham, like I moved here over 10 years ago, and I think the Asian population, I'm clear Asian, but like grows significantly in the last 4 or 5 years. When I first moved here 10 years ago, of course, I walk on the street, and like I don't see a lot of Chinese around me, but now that I walk out, there are a lot of Asian communities there, right? So I really appreciate that. I think that is a crucial point. The reason I really wanted to be here is I've been here for over 10 years. My kids never experienced this. I've never experienced this personally. So we are in a safe environment. The thing is, the impact of that rare case to the Asian community is huge. So it's like a huge difference between whether they happen frequently or just once. Like this type of incident to the Asian community could be once and very impactful. That's why we're here. And then I read your blogs. I really appreciate your blog about the color plan, right? And I think you really understand.
Which one was that? You're the only one who read it, so.
Well,
Oh, colorblind. Oh, you read that?
yes, I do.
You're
And I
third person. My father was one. Mary Lammy might have read it.
Some of us read it.
Really? Okay, I read that and I remember I was in a car reading your blogs because we can't judge we can't make impression or make assumption on to someone who's in the situation because you don't understand them, right? So I really appreciate like everyone coming here to hear about what we are here to say. It's like 2 hours a night that I could not appreciate more. I think we had 2 hours, like last time, we spent another 2 hours, and I appreciate the gesture. And then everything that was done, even at the Brown Meadow, and I think since the incident happened, I see a lot of changes. I see the principal comes to classroom, talk about this, my kids learn about that. The starting of the year, I think even the watch was stopped, not being used in Brown Meadow. I could not appreciate more. The actions that we take is fast. It's immediate, and I couldn't appreciate more of that. I do wanted to point out about our culture, like Asian culture. I wanted to take an opportunity to say that is, like, normally we're not talkative, right? Like we do our business, right? Like we don't really know about the school policy. I've been here for over 10 years. I'm a talkative person. I trust the school. I trust the policy. It's a safe environment. I don't want to learn more about it. Because it's safe. I believe that. So, and even if something happened, we'll put that in the head, it's gonna go away. Something happened, we'll put that in the head, it's gonna go away. That's how we trust that. We wanted to focus on work. That's just the culture I was grew up with. What I wanted to point out is the reason that we're here, stand here, is out of our comfort zone either. That means it's reaching to a point to the community, like we wanted to know more. There are confusions. And I'm not sure the confusion is the policy. I feel like the confusion might be, how do we surface the fact then to you, to the principal? Do you know it's been like this? Like there are reported cases, there are silent staffers. Like the reason we're here is, how do we make sure those silent staffers come to you so that we can collectively make some changes either through the protocol, either through the policy changes. Like the reason it's a heartfelt message. Like I come from this culture. For me to be here, to say this out loud, it's not our comfort zone, but that really means we've heard silent staffers around the community. And that might be really just because in the past 3, 4, 5 years, Asian community has increased so much in Needham, like there's reaching 10%. The voice is louder. I do wanted to point that out. And I think echoing what Dennis said, like the reason we are asking how fast it can be done is not because like, hey, let's get it done. It's really, culture-wise, we are reaching to a point that the community wants to know. Like, and I think we wanted to champion this, like Dennis and I, we wanted to help to communicate to the Asian community. Well, the school is focusing on this, but we really wanted to trying to understand how do we bring this silent efforts to you. And I think the Newton protocol that when I was reading that, then as you mentioned, in the elementary school versus the high school, the kids in the elementary school, especially coming from our culture, they might not be very vocal, right? When things happen, they might be quiet. Parents might be quiet, but that doesn't mean that impact is not there. But the Newton protocol, as you said, the communication is reinforced. Things happen, principal needs to be involved, and we know things happen. I think this might be a great first step for us to get there. How do we make sure to help the family when the incident happened? Let's build a protocol. Principal will know, parents will know, and we bring the transparency, and let's all talk about it. I really feel like this first step, it's not there yet. That's why we're here in the gap. It's not like we're not focusing on, it's not like we're not really paying a lot of attention. Like, I appreciate everything Brown Meadow has been done and it's such a fast turnaround. I wish the transparency is there, so everybody have the trust. I think that really, we're hoping to be a first step, and that's really why we're asking, what can be done faster? What can be done as a pilot? What can be done so that we can show the improvement, so that we can, you know, at least build and establish trust within the Asian community.
I very much appreciate hearing you share that perspective, you know, about, there's no question that the Asian community is growing in this community and our students. And, you know, you said that there are silent sufferers. I think that is true of all kinds of different students from different backgrounds and experiences. And, you know, I think Mary would agree, our challenge is, and I think Finn and Emma know this too, how do you get students to be upstanders, to stand up for somebody? How do you get students to be vocal and to say this isn't right? Who can I go to talk about this? That remains a challenge for us because there is racism in the Needham public schools. There are bad things that happen in the public schools. There are drugs in the Needham public schools. The Needham public schools is a reflection of this community and of this nation. We are not apart from it. We are a part of it. And so things happen. And our challenge, it has been my challenge in 42 years, well, it's 43 years in education, is how do you welcome young people in from all these diverse backgrounds and encourage them to support one another and speak up when something happens. I think more of that is happening. I think the presence of these two, amazing high school students here is evidence of that, who will come and speak up and speak out and engage. We have to do more of that. And we have to support our families to understand what we're trying to do. We're calling it now the Newton Protocol. I wonder if anybody in Newton is watching this. But what I like about the theme in the Newton Protocol is that they have in one place for clarity for families what we are already trying to do. We have it in two places. And so, with the school committee's guidance, I want to try to bring them together and figure out what kind of conversations and information we can share so families know it and that students know it as well. So, thank you.
One of the other things that we're doing, which is a technical, is so much more proactively that I don't want to de-emphasize. However, we have the students in anybody really, but students and families have the ability to report bullying electronically if that's something that has happened or they are afraid that has happened. We don't have a form that is specific to discrimination or harassment or other terminology, so it's a small change, but it might help to have that more accessible for students and families who don't feel comfortable in person coming forward, but have another way to provide information. And that the way it works now is when somebody submits a form, I get alerted and the principal of the school gets alerted. So there's from a district and school level, we're both connecting with each other and then looking into the situation.
That's a good example of policy and practice. The policy from the school committee is no discrimination, again, based on federal and state laws, and it should be, a welcoming environment. That's policy. A way to get to that perhaps is to have a form for families or students to fill out. If that doesn't work, you can try something different. So that's the difference between the policy, which guides your action, and then how do you practically implement it to have the greatest effect.
When you say the form, what form is it?
So on the websites it's called a bullying incident reporting form.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is we have that, and you actually can claim, oftentimes a claim will come in as bullying that might be discrimination and bullying. It just, depends. So what I'm suggesting is that we put those forms in a more front facing, because to get to them from Broadmeadow, for example, you'd have to click into Broadmeadow, click into for students or for families, you get to the form. Right now, Broadmeadow is inactive because we're changing the form, so we'll be back live very quickly. And the same for the district. When you go into the district, you've got to go into the bullying webpage and the incident form is there. So this is actually, it just happens to be that this is something that we're working on right now because we recognize that could be an improvement on having information for anybody to really have access to. And then again, the ability to reach out and report something. It also has who you can contact. So some families will submit a form and then call.
Right.
Or some, I don't want to submit a form, but can we talk about this? So it comes in a lot of different ways.
So submitting the form, going to initiate what actions afterwards? Will be just documented or just like, okay, there will be investigation afterwards?
That's a great question. So I'll use bullying for an example. Any report of bullying needs to be looked into, oftentimes investigated.
Got it.
And I say it that way because sometimes all of the time, the first question we have is just to be sure we're understanding what the concern is.
Right.
And then as soon as it's apparent that it's a concern or, claim of bullying, we have to investigate it.
Okay,
Yeah, and then there's a whole investigation process that has to happen, parents are notified. And a fine, then there's a result of that. So our administrators are trained in how to do that.
so after the investigation, there will be, if there's a disciplinary actions, we should create a data point, and then that data will post it to the state website.
Yeah,
Yes,
yes.
Okay,
now that's, again, we have to report all this data. It's not, there are no secrets there. There are no names there either, or anything that will identify a child.
right,
I think an important thing for families to understand that bullying is tricky, because when all of us, I'll accept and been from this, when we think about bullying, we may think about it from when, schoolyard a long time ago, and he bullied me. There's a very specific definition for what bullying is and what it is not. We won't get into that right now,
right,
but after we investigate it, if we determine that it is not bullying,
right.
the student or the family may disagree, but we've made a determination. That's not going to be reported to the state, because we've made a determination that it's not bullying. However, along the way, we will communicate with families to let them know where we're at.
And one thing that.
Can you clarify when you mention you notify the families? What are you saying, which families, how is this done? Because I know there are some privacy rules certainly that come into play, but could you kind of clarify a little bit what you mean by you notify the families?
Family of the child who was, with the terminology we use is the target, and the family of the aggressor. Both receive written communications as well as verbal. Yeah, when it's in a formal investigation. There's students or staff members that might have been witness to the incident and part of the investigation process. That's a verbal communication. And there's some things that we can share and other things that we can't share because there is student privacy. Yeah, so that's what that looks like.
Lynn was trying to speak earlier. What are you saying, something? And Mary wanted.
Yeah, I guess Dennis probably asked the same question. I think just the submit, if they're decided not a bully, so it's not reported to the state, is that the gap of the stats shareable to the public or?
Yeah, so, a recent change to our reporting is that we now report bullying and all allegations of bullying.
Oh,
So,
I see.
yeah,
Allegations,
yes, and so that's new.
right,
And so in looking at the reporting, there's, it comes through in similar ways, but there's
Yeah.
some differences. So it's something before, when I was looking at it before coming here, I'm like, oh, this needs a little bit of cleanup because sometimes it's written as like allegations of bullying and other times it's written a little bit differently. So you have to dig in to see, well, what was the result of that? So I think we could have a cleaner way of looking at the data, but that's all state reported.
oh, Canterbury, like.
And there will be,
Great,
there's no
yeah.
question, and in most school systems, there'll be many more allegations of bullying than actual.
There
bullying.
is, yeah.
Sure, it's just the nature of it.
In fact, what happens a lot is that there's conflict between students and it's coming through as bullying. And, we do want to take caution because the law around bullying is there for a reason. It was a real safety issue for students back before the law came into play. And things have changed dramatically since that time. However, especially since COVID, conflict between people has become more challenging. So we are absolutely investigating a lot more claims of bullying that should not need that kind of formalized process. So, as is always the case, there's a lot of benefits to the process and procedure, and it can be frustrating sometimes because administrators and teachers spend a lot of time in these procedures, and that takes away from our proactive measures around teaching and learning. So it's an ebb and flow. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I promise, last question following up from me on this. So are we planning to separate the racial cases versus the bullying cases in the future?
It
Right.
is separated, yes,
Okay.
yeah, so when we investigate or when we get a claim, if it's,
Okay,
if we look and see what the context of
Yeah.
is. If it is based off of a protected class, we immediately go into investigation that's more discrimination harassment, which looks very similar. It's some nuances, but of course, we have a different lens. We go.
so that both of these will be reported,
Yeah.
okay.
And
Yeah.
furthermore, the Federal Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights is very clear about what they expect to see and how we report. Guys, it's, you know, part of what I think my opinion is we spend a lot of time reporting. I'm not sure that it has the impact that maybe was intended by the, whatever legislature created it. For me, what's more important is that we're clear with our community, that we share data, even if it's ugly data, about what's going on. And then try to figure out how we can make it better. And we'll continue to be transparent with the school committee about information and try to make improvements. We shouldn't be embarrassed about bad data. We should be embarrassed if we don't do anything about it. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question? It's maybe a technical question. I think I agree that if we come to investigation or submitting a form, that's going to spend a lot of time on doing investigations on the teacher side, school side. If it's worth of it, of course. But I also agree with the Dan saying that it's like sometimes when things happens like things like this happen at an elementary school level, it's more like a teaching education using
Yes.
counseling or mediated conversation to help kids understand this is not the right thing to do and prevent this from happening in the future, which is doesn't require reporting, maybe,
Yes.
right? In the force. So, but the thing is like this, the small things keep happening. So even we have multiple incidents last school year across schools. In the past 7 days, I heard another incident from Newman School. But I think the teacher handles it pretty well, which means like give kids a chance to explain and to understand what happens, things like this. So do we think we should have a way to document this in a way, just document the data points, not like, you know, while protecting the privacy of the student self and like document the data points. So, okay, there's something happens like here at what time and at what school and what has been done, you know, in terms of restorative or mediation related and to help kids. If the same kid happens again, then that will be a problem, right? But I think that probably give us a good way to monitor what's going on like around the schools. And also like try to save some of the resources on the later, because if you teach them well now when they're still little, and when they go to middle school and high school, they probably be more respectful of each other or different culture. In that way, that might save the time in the future.
So I really appreciate this conversation. And I just wanted to add, as important as it is that we have these discussions about what the school system does, this is in some pretty granular detail, right? What happens in a particular incident, how that gets handled, what's the policy, what's the protocol, those things are all important. However, it is only part of the equation, because whatever the schools do, our school or any other schools around the country, we are still bringing in students from the broader community. And if we don't also pay attention to how we're, and I'm not meaning schools, I'm meaning within the community, describing within our community what we consider to be acceptable, what we consider to be painful. If we don't also have that conversation with the broader community, we really aren't addressing the root issues. I hope that makes sense. I'm actually past my bedtime. And
So
I
Dan over the years has said, you know, we only have the students for a certain number of hours a day. You've got parents, you've got houses of worship there. It's the entire community that, you know, really needs to be in sync on all of this.
And since you all are the Human Rights Committee and you're a town level group, this is an opportunity for, I think, more collaboration across the web.
It can also be challenging because, I mean, we say this all the time, we're talking to the same people over and over again. So it's community outreach, but it's community outreach to people who have not been engaged in the past.
And I think that's the challenge that sort of we all have, is how do you reach those people who need it most, who are totally disengaged? And
Or completely discouraged.
yeah, I don't know how
So,
you, yeah.
That is,
But there are some people in the middle, right? It's not all black and white. So maybe we want the people in the middle.
I think your point, we will certainly consider ways that we can continue to, look at and assess what data is coming in. That's an interesting point. I appreciate you saying that. I want to be, real clear that there will be acts of bias, even hate, in the Needham Public Schools this year. Things are going to happen, and next year, and the following year. The Needham Public Schools is not going to do away with racism in our community. However, we have a role to play in engaging our students primarily and their families. In what are developmental ways that we can help children as they grow, so that when they get to middle school and high school, they think differently about some of these issues than perhaps they did before. And maybe they can in turn be ambassadors to the community because they've learned something in school. It's got to be an all hands on deck approach. And the schools are a part of the equation. And we're committed to doing what we can do.
I know it's really late and I hate to drag us back into the weeds, but I have just one question that might be a little bit in the weeds. Is the process for making a complaint or telling the school that something's happened to your child, does that process look the same at all of the elementary schools and at the high school and the middle school? So that doesn't change. And my other question is, when somebody is deciding to make that report, is it on the parent to decide, oh, is this something, like, should I use this form because I think it's a bullying thing, or is it this form because it's that?
No,
Okay.
no, I mean, the form is there. We really try to provide, multiple avenues for folks to feel like they can come forward. So sometimes people are accessing the Google form that we have a different form that has the same fields, but it's a different, it's just a document. More often than not, it's a call into actually, a lot of times it's an email into the principal or the teacher. We do a lot of training for teachers to know if you're receiving these emails, you've got to let an administrator know, because oftentimes intuition is a teacher will just engage with the parent to try to work it through. So there's lots of different ways. Sometimes students and kiddos, sorry about that. Students don't want to come forward, and parents are trying to sort of help navigate that. So they'll help to make an adult aware of the situation, but don't want us to do anything with the information, and we're trying to work that through.
And so even if something is not rising to the level of what the investigation would determine to be officially bullying or an act of discrimination, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, that there's probably still some kind of intervention going on at the school, even if it hasn't meant those.
Yes, one of the first things that we do is we create, mitigating measures to be sure that whatever might be going on, it will stop until we understand a little bit more about what's going on. And that can look like, very simple things, and sometimes it's about separating students. It really depends.
Put another way, if someone fills out the form, the bullying form, but they're not sure what it is, we're gonna have a conversation with them.
Yes, very
That's the best
quickly,
way to
yeah.
say it.
So, can I follow with this technical question I might earlier? So if an incident happened and the teacher talked to the students, talked to the parents, and then, so there is a possibility that this doesn't get reported if the students and parents decided not to, or did not go to the principal, if that's the case.
If a staff member believes that bullying may have taken place, we need to look into it. So it really does depend. it really depends on the information that we have.
I see. I think this is where I always get hung up on is because like, if teacher take care of it, because they're fine. I wouldn't, I probably will. But most of my friends maybe just like let it go, right? But it doesn't mean that they're not impacted. So that is where I felt like I always get hung up there, like they will talk to the community, this happened, but they wouldn't go to the principal.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think then back to your point, like clearly lay out that things happened. Let's make sure principals are aware so that the family doesn't have to think of, do I say it? Like the environment that I grew up with, I don't talk to the principal ever. My parents don't want to because that means you're getting in trouble. So the culture wise is very different.
Yeah.
I do feel like having a protocol is gonna help us significantly because we don't have to debate that. It's just the environment that we grow up with.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
I think another piece of it too is that to create more opportunities for families and the schools to communicate together about what happens when there's harm or, you know, something has happened, because it doesn't always mean the same thing. It often means oftentimes parents are saying together, you know, our two kids got into this situation, can we figure out a way to work this through?
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. The
Yep.
counselors are involved. So it doesn't, you know, it's, sometimes we'll hear from a parent, I don't want to get that child in trouble. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the outcome of us getting involved. It's really, we're an educational system. We are there to balance accountability with learning, and it has
Yeah.
everything to do with age and developmental needs and things like that. So if
Absolutely.
we could have some more
Yeah.
conversations like that, it might feel less intrusive for some families to come forward.
I feel like
Yeah.
so bringing this transparency to the
Yes.
parents, like, it's not what we thought it will be, because
Yes, yeah.
nobody wanted to get the others into trouble. I think that will definitely be helpful. Thank you. Yeah,
Thanks for bringing that up. That's really important.
thank you.
How you guys feeling? Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you guys. This is great.
Thank you
We
for the
really appreciate you
conversation.
coming.
This is
Is
how we
that
do
enough?
good work. Thank you.
Bedroom.
Well, let's go home to bed.
Marlene, I'll get that to you.
Yeah.
You know what? No charge.
Oh, Katie said, okay.
Coffee money.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
It's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Guys, can we slot through for like the next 30 minutes to get through some of this stuff, please? Okay.
We have to close it closer.
And if you can hear me, we're good, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've had some communication on the working groups. Do you guys have questions about all of that? I know there's been a lot of email that I've been sending out
So we
about
said the
logistics.
conversation
and-
one does not have to be open meetings, but the
Because it's
policy one
going
does.
to be,
If under the town manager, we convene the group and we draft the charge and the composition and bring the folks together, then it's not a subcommittee of HRC. We can do it like cops and communities.
however, we are still sort of responsible for guiding this. It can't just be a free-for-all. So Amelia and Cynthia have graciously agreed to facilitate the group. That does not mean that they're doing the legwork for it, but it's sort of organizing, delegating, and making sure the event or series goes off without a hitch. do you have questions about how any of that's gonna look?
I just had a question. It sounds like the first order of business is the policy committee and developing that. And devoting a lot of time and energy to getting that started, and then the conversations group will maybe not follow, but come next.
What policy?
I feel like we were going to.
Maybe we should explain, I mean, I don't know if you were,
So we were also going to, so there were a couple of working groups that we decided to,
Yeah, I remember that.
yeah, so. No,
Okay,
we haven't done anything yet.
okay. that's what I
So the
thought.
policy, we haven't done anything around policy because I wanted to see how this meeting was gonna shake out
Oh,
first.
okay.
Okay, because I think there were some misconceptions about what it meant to be part of the policy committee and what we would be able to accomplish, given we're not official members of either school committee or the public school system. I think there are definitely some things that we can do, but that is, as a committee, we just sort of need to sort that out. So my understanding that it was that we were gonna run these two committees concurrently. You're either on one or the other.
It seems like the
both, some
school
people.
committee is really interested in engaging, at least Liz is, so maybe.
I was glad
Strike
she
while
said that,
the
yeah. I
iron's
was
hot.
wondering if she knew about the.
Yes, she
Committee
knows. She's our liaison.
Oh, good.
She's our new.
Is she gonna start coming to all of them?
Not all of them, but certainly she and I have to have a discussion about sort of what she feels is appropriate. Not everything is gonna be relevant to her, so I don't think she's gonna attend every single meeting, but certainly as we develop agendas and if there are things that touch upon either the school or fringe issues or things that she's just interested in general that may somehow relate to what's happening on a school committee level, then yeah, she's welcome to come to any and all of the meetings that she is officially our liaison. We have somebody from the school committee that is going to work on the policy piece with us. Andrea had mentioned Matt Spengler, but I need to confirm that with her and Dan. Liz will probably be involved with the community conversations on race piece. So neither of these committees really have any official charges yet, just because I think that each committee has to decide that on their own. Especially if we're involving folks from different organizations within town. I mean, I think there's sort of this general guiding principle, but I think the first meeting will be for each working group will be discussing the purpose, what are we trying to accomplish? If there's an audience, what's the target audience? How do we reach them? All of these things. So that all we just need to start sort of working that out. But are there any other questions or comments about that? I know it's a little vague right now, but it's just because neither of the working groups have met yet.
Yeah, as I look at, thank you very much for maybe we could share that with the whole committee. You gave us an overview of what the goal and the purpose of the committee is for the conversations and also the policy. That was very helpful. And as and Cynthia and I are processing that and figuring out, I'm wondering in terms of the conversation group, we're inviting people, like Chinese Friends of Needham, the school committee. How many people do you think will be on that committee? Because at our last meeting, we were thinking, Cynthia mentioned 8 is kind of a work. It sounds like we're going way beyond the 8 for the conversations committee.
I don't think it's gonna be that. So there's a representative from Chinese Friends. HRC, right, has 2, 3 maybe, but 1 school committee member. Ramen,
From NDR.
Nicole and Beth are sort of tag teaming.
I spoke with Raman. I sent him an email, asked him if he would, Cynthia and I were trying to reach him and he's been very sick, but we had a meeting last night and he said he would check our email.
Okay.
We really would like him to be on
Yeah,
that
he was
conversations
very-
committee.
Yeah, in person at NRN meeting, he said yes. It's because what Jen and some of us were involved with the Coxsackie community. I think it's great to have some people who went through that experience and I understand a whole lot of the work was done in the committee.
All of
It
the work was done.
really, that the
Yeah.
output that we saw.
Yeah.
As a result of a lot of back and forth, and so
It's
that's
painful.
one of the things we need to be mindful of in anything.
Yeah, so he would be a great voice to have, and then potentially Renaz, but her time commitment is, she's got so much going on right now, so that brings us to 8, I think.
And then
You-
I
you know-
think that I would bring it.
Tina, I thought it important to be on for the school committee, for the superintendent part of this meeting. I actually was supposed to be in a meeting a half an hour ago, but I thought I should stay on because it was really important. So I'm gonna have to sign off now, but I thought this was a really, really meaningful, time spent.
Okay, thanks, Bud. Talk soon.
So the other group that I'm hoping to get, that we can get someone from is the Interfaith Clergy Association, and their first meeting is October 3rd. And talking with the leaders, that it probably will work best at that meeting to present some more and to see if we can find somebody. A lot of people are interested in it, it's just getting a person to make that commitment.
Right. I mean, even if we don't necessarily, because I have emailed a few people from there and I have not received any responses. All of that, actually, all the contacts that you had recommended, Cynthia.
Yeah.
So
But
even
in
if we,
person, I might be able to get them.
I mean, even if we, my feeling is, even if we're not able to get somebody to commit, because it's going to be time consuming to try to put this together, as those of you who are involved with the Coxsackie community event will attest to, it was time consuming. We definitely need to involve interfaith clergy in some point, so maybe if they're not fully committing to the entire series, maybe we're pulling them in, for a presentation, or they're running a working group or something like that, that's
Yeah.
gonna be less time consuming.
Yeah.
So I think we're at sort of like the 8/9.
If you could share what you have with me and, while that planning group should further define what the event is, I would highly recommend that we start with something so that people know what they're signing up for.
Yep.
And then the group will obviously fine tune it, but for Coxsackie Communities, the working group, we came back to the originally drafted charge, which I think had originally come from Nuari, like 1 million times to ground the work. So something has to be in writing that all members agree conceptually on, and then so
So I'll send you guys what I sent to Cindy and Amelia, and then just, you can go from there.
So I'm wondering whether, since Amelia and I have something that's not totally clear, but that to some way in which representing the Human Rights Committee, working with Katie, that maybe the two of us could find the time to sit down and at least look at structure, like you're saying. There's a certain amount you need beforehand.
Yeah.
For people to commit, and then after that, it gets changed to fit what the people who are on the committee think would be best.
yep, I'm happy to find a time for us to.
Okay, and then for those of you who are gonna be working on the policy stuff, I'll email you and we can figure out, that's gonna be a much less, it's intense work, but it's a very different, we're not putting on any sort of event, right? So it's more, it's a lot more dialogue, it's a lot more kind of digging into what currently, a lot of what Dr. Goodkant's presented, and sort of figuring, there are a lot of questions that came out of that discussion, and I'm sure there are a lot more. So I will email you guys separately on that. Does that sound good? Okay. Harvest Fair is coming up.
You didn't say anything about the discrimination.
I know, because I can't.
Okay, I'll just,
I know what we need to do.
okay, I'll just ignore that.
I know what we need to do. I'm down. I'm just hoping it's gonna manifest itself,
It
and
was,
we're gonna roll it out.
it was on the agenda.
Rolling it out.
I wasn't letting you miss it. Okay.
We're gonna give it to Mary Lynn.
Yeah.
For her form.
We're gonna pull her form. We're just gonna roll it out.
Okay.
Harvest Fair. We, the date again, please.
October 1st,
Okay,
so
so,
a week from
Sunday.
Sunday.
oh, we need volunteers.
I could be there for some. Do we figure out, can we like split it up? Because it's 4 hours?
Yeah,
Can we do it like 2-hour shifts?
Did I see some little interest over there?
I didn't, you know.
Well, do you guys know what it is?
No, what's
Not
the,
really.
like,
It's fun. Who?
No, I don't really know what it is.
When it, because you're kind of
it's
organizing.
called, it's, the title of the exhibit is called Voices in Unity. And the Needham Diversity Initiative has invited all of the groups that are advocating for inclusion and equity and in Needham to exhibit their work or be there to talk about their work. And what we're suggesting is not have a display, but simply have a handout of some sort and a name tag. So when people are wandering around, it's a very informal, welcoming place. You're in Greensfield. It's hopefully the sun will be shining and people are in a very receptive mood. And the last 3 events have been very successful in terms of people becoming interested in the different groups. And the Human Rights Committee will be represented. And actually, I've been away. I haven't been at any of the fairs, but there is a video. Actually, I should send that to you from 2 years ago that Equal Justice Needham took. And it'll give you a sense of the informality, but also how people are interacting and finding out about Immigration Justice Task Force, Human Rights Committee, all the different groups. And as of now, I've been facilitating the groups that are going to be presenting. I think we have 7 or 8 groups right now that will
Really?
be there.
Wow.
But we're not going to have displays. It's not going to be like the Multicultural Festival. People are just wandering around. We're recommending you wear a big name tag. So Human Rights Committee, and so that people and gives a handout or something else, you know, that.
Do you know what?
We don't have a table? We don't have a table?
We have a table, but everything will be on one table and the space is limited.
Do you know what
and-
the Harvest Fair is?
Yeah.
So like the bank is there, you know, all these different groups
It's true.
in town are there.
When
The-
it's not your
and there's-
turn to be at the table, you can go around.
And there's
See.
food and balloons and stuff
It's
for kids.
organized by the Charles River Regional Chamber, it's the Chamber of Commerce for the towns near Needham and the town of Needham. So that they are sponsoring and organizing the fair. And you have to apply and you get permission. So we are joining a Needham Diversity Initiative table. And there'll be a big sign, Voices in Unity, above the table. But people are wandering, their tables, and it's not just groups, their businesses represent everyone in the community who has applied and was accepted.
It's fun.
to have a display.
Carrie, you did it for a long time, didn't you, last time?
And you were on the video, you and Marlene.
I got there for part of it.
Do we have marketing collateral, or does that need to be put together to hand out or something that, I don't, what did we do
From
last
last
time?
What did you do last
We
year?
had those brochures and I think, did we put the,
I think Raman has them all. I think he took everything home. I don't know if we
I
got
don't know,
it
we
back.
put out a big bowl of candy and that got people to stuff at the table. So
That was really, yeah,
That's
Didn't we
that's right out.
use the brochures too?
I think, I remember
Yeah, we did have
Katie
some
ran
of
them off.
Yeah.
Yeah, Louise.
So maybe a brochure is enough.
And
To hand
wasn't
out.
there sign up sheets, all the different organizations have like. a-
If
Yeah,
people were
we
interested,
collecting email addresses if they wanted to.
And be
get
sure
our-
to have big enough space.
because we need, we need more members.
Like a QR code that
Yeah,
some people
yeah.
could sign up, because you can never read those sign-up sheets.
Yeah, ever, yes,
QR codes are a good idea. So what are the hours?
it's 11 to 3.
No,
I'm sorry, I'll be
it
out of
started at
town.
1.
11
11 is
to
for
3.
setup.
It says 11 to, I'm on the Charles
Oh,
River
I'm wrong.
Chamber
It
website.
starts earlier than I thought.
It sounds like only,
We just ask you,
Only
since you're
Jan,
just
so
bringing brochures, you don't have to set anything up, just be there before 11.
I'm thinking of the diversity side, it starts at 1.
So who's doing
which everybody should
it?
do.
Jen, and is that it?
I
But
could do
I'm-
11 to 1.
I just said who else is doing it?
Oh, the other groups?
No, no, no,
From here.
from here.
Oh,
It looks like I see people looking at their.
I know. Can we do work?
I do work most Sundays, but
I could do 11 to 1.
I'll make it work.
Better. I know you will.
Yeah, no, I have work 10 to 4. That's-
I can probably.
We'll
do
stop
it.
at French press. on the way down.
At 3.
1 to 3.
Ooh.
That's good.
right.
I have an.
So do you
event
have a
that's
name
already-
tag? Human Rights Committee name tag?
I feel like we do, it must be someone I wrote. But
If you don't, just email me. And do folks want brochures and how many? And I can have them at the.
Who has the,
Had them at the front desk of the town manager's office. Somebody wants to pick them up.
do you still have the,
She said she'll make brochures.
okay, you already have it. You have the
The
file.
PDF, yeah,
Yeah,
so we can print
okay.
it off. I
So-
just need somebody to tell me that they're gonna come pick it up at town
It
hall
probably
on.
doesn't say that. you
by
have a
Friday.
Discrimination complaint process.
Town hall's not open on Saturday. So somebody would have to pick up the brochures the week prior.
Well, I can pick up the brochure, but I'm not going to the event, so who can I take it to? You're
Drop
the-
it up in my mailbox or something?
Yeah, I'll take it to your house. Let me just double check. Pick up the brochure. Sure.
Or I can pick it up at your house if you want.
I'll check in with Nate.
How about on Thursday?
Bud,
Pick
I
up
have
on
to work that
Thursday.
day, so I can't make it either. I'll ask these
I
guys and
can't
see
do
what they
it that
say.
day because Sunday we have a special thing from early in the morning, so.
Yeah, I'll pick them up and I'll drop them off to you either Friday or Saturday. Okay?
That's good.
Good is another good, because I went recently to be sworn in, because. And Teddy wasn't, no one was there to swear me in.
Oh, really?
Yeah, nobody was available, so
You have to do that.
you're supposed to.
Yeah.
I know. I don't know when I was re-upped, but, okay.
Any other questions or
It's a fun thing.
comments about that?
And as you're interacting with people, just to have, tell them who we are, you know, why we exist, and maybe some of the things that we have done or are currently doing.
Are we gonna have any information available about discrimination process or not? That's not yet.
Not
Then, not then?
No.
No, I don't
Did you get that?
Just trying to figure out my time in my dark.
It was the summer.
Oh, Marlene, I get it.
We could hand out the annual report.
You're-
No one reads it.
So excited. Amazing.
Dana, is there any chance we could swap the next two things, because we really have to make a decision about naming somebody for the town committee?
Sure, yes, so.
I wanted, because it's getting near 9 and I know the bell rings.
Yeah, they throw you out here.
Yeah.
Like Louise stays.
Do you wanna talk about that committee?
Okay, and Katie is the one who's sort of been bringing it to us. So the town has decided to have, I guess it's the select board decided to have a committee to relook at the town seal. And people are probably familiar with the town seal. It's on all the official documents. And also to, look at the possibility of having kind of like a logo or branding, because they felt that an official town seal was being used pretty widely in places that it probably didn't need to be used. And that the relooking at the town seal will to be, look at it in terms of, its quality and its appropriateness of the existing town seal. And there are 9 people who are going to be, 9 seats for the committee. Which will include a town moderator designee, a current member of the select board, member of the historic commission, representative from the Needham History Center and Museum, representative of the Needham Council for Arts and Culture, and here's us, representative of the Human Rights Committee. One citizen at large with experience in visual communication, one representative of the Massachusetts Native Training Indians, and the town manager ex officio. So my involvement in this has been because of having been involved with the Massachusetts Native Training Indians, and I happened to hear at one of the town meetings about they were gonna look at the town seal and asked about it. And Kevin Key is from the select board, is very interested, and I think is gonna probably be a member of it, right? So he and I are both on a committee that I've reported to, a community group called that's the Memorial for Enslaved and Indigenous People. So through that committee, I've been and helping to involve connection with the Massachusetts Native Training Union. So through that connection, they will be sending a representative, which I feel is very fits with one of the things that the Human Rights Committee would probably lead in, that you consult people who are affected by decisions. And since the event portrayed in the town seal is with Nahoyden, whose native name is Nahantan, conveying the grant that has to do with allowing Needham to become the town. And so these people are, there's a praying Indian, and these people are, this tribe are descendants of the praying Indians whose center was in Native, but the area was very large, and certainly included what is now become Needham. So I'm excited about that, making that connection. And so this group needs to decide on having a representative for that group.
What are the, so how, do you know, just logistics, how often,
They can maybe, and
how often that the group is meeting? And
It's not set yet, because, all of those groups that Cynthia listed are assigning people, so the first meeting is usually, what's the charge, what's the cadence of the meetings? And I don't anticipate it'll be fully constituted until next month, so it would kick off, either, October or just after town meeting in November.
okay,
And is there, like an end date for when the committee is supposed to have their work done?
No, not a set date, no,
Like, you have a year to do it, or you have 3 months? No, nobody's just said that.
no, no. But I don't anticipate it would be longer than a year.
I just had a call, someone named Dave Sherman is trying to call into your meeting.
Okay.
Needs some help or something.
Thank you, thank you.
And then
You don't have public comment right now, but if you want to take it, I'm happy to.
can we just quickly, so
I was wondering if Cynthia, since you've already been involved, do you want to be the representative?
if I'm asked, I would be happy to.
Oh, you're the perfect. Like, you're the perfect person, you have the background.
Yeah, I just need another committee, but no, I feel really strongly about what this town is doing and agreeing with the direction of how this has been set up.
okay, great, perfect.
We don't have to vote on it. just
No,
Cynthia
okay.
will be.
You don't have to vote on it.
Cynthia.
too.
Okay.
Cynthia will be our representative.
Do we want to,
No, it's public comment is over, right?
I mean, he went through all the trouble to
call the library?
I feel like, let's find out, but.
Katie, can we please?
Well, actually, we didn't even have.
Thank you for letting
No.
me know.
Except during the dance thing.
Mess.
I tried to promote him, but I was just up there.
David Sherman.
Oh, he's got his hand up, I see.
Oh, is he on mute?
David, if you unmute, we can hear you now.
Hi there, can you hear me now?
Hi, yes.
Thank you very much. I didn't want to interrupt whatever you were talking about. Is this a good time to raise a different issue that's not on the agenda?
We only have a couple minutes, but yes.
It'll only take a couple of minutes, but I know you were talking about something else. I actually intended the message that I was on the Zoom to be handed to you on paper rather than have it be verbal, although I do appreciate the library's help there.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to raise an issue that developed about 2 weeks or so ago during the 9/11 commemoration. There was a chaplain whose name I didn't get and whose department I don't know what department that he works for, but it was clearly a town-sponsored event and I believe an official town chaplain whose prayer was completely sectarian. I mean, of course, all members of all religions were lost on that awful day. I know I wasn't the only participant, not a member of that particular chaplain's faith, but the way that he worded the prayer would have been heresy in my religion to even say amen to it. And I actually emailed Kate Fitzpatrick about it, and all I've gotten back is Miles Tucker, who's an assistant to her, I believe, who simply said, "Thanks for writing on this issue. It sparked a productive discussion among senior staff." It strikes me that it probably needs a little bit more clarification as to the idea that respect for human rights of all members of the community, really, this sort of thing should be prevented in the future, and prayers should be at official town events should be non-sectarian. I'm privileged to work with a number of chaplains in my life. I'm an ICU nurse, and they're all excellent at crafting non-sectarian prayers. So I hope that Needham can rise up to that standard once again.
Okay, thank you. Do you?
David, I'm happy to follow up also, back in the office with Kate and Miles. That's not a town employee, but it certainly was a town event, so I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, I see that your name is listed as Town of Needham, but I'm sorry, I can't make out your face here as to who exactly you are.
All right, Katie King, Deputy Town Manager.
Katie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hook into the email thread between me and Miles. I'd appreciate if you just go ahead and respond as to what's going on with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me interrupt.
Okay, so the last thing, we have a couple minutes, is the Indigenous Peoples legislation.
Yeah, this is very quick. Last May, I think we decided that we wanted an Indigenous person come to talk to us to get a better understanding of the reasoning for the bill from an Indigenous perspective, and that's the Indigenous Peoples' Day by endorsing the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda.
Right.
I agreed to contact Claudia Foxtree. That was recommended that we contact someone from the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness. I didn't get a chance to do it until later in the summer, but when I went to their website, I looked at the resources, and there are people who are listed who are primarily speakers or presenters. And we wanted someone just to come and talk to us for maybe half an hour at the beginning of a meeting. And I don't think any of these people, I mean, they expect a fee, and it's more, plus this is October is Indigenous Peoples' Day. And it's difficult to get someone, and November is Indigenous.
Native American Awareness Month or something.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, however, I went to their website, and here's what I proposed. There is a fantastic resource for us to access. It's called Public Education and Awareness Program, and they have a toolkit that you can download. It answers every question you have, and they give very practical suggestions. So my suggestion, and I could share this if you agree, I could share this with you and you can download it. It's called An Advocate's Guide to Supporting Indigenous Peoples' Day, which is that we were just going to focus on that one.
That's correct.
One part of the legislation. So what would you like to do?
Please send that around,
Okay.
because the impetus was before we actually moved forward with any recommendation to the select board, we needed to educate ourselves to really make sure that we knew what we were talking about.
And they have tips. I mean, we could even send this to them if we're, after we look at it. So maybe at some point we could decide when, it seems to me, and maybe Cynthia, you know, that this bill is still going to be discussed this coming year, right? It's 23, 24.
Yeah,
Period.
It's rare that they get out of committee at the beginning, but
So we have some time to do
Yes.
this, so
Does
maybe,
Needham as a town still call it Columbus Day?
what they did is slash. Indigenous Day slash Columbus Day.
Yeah.
They added it on, right?
But the schools
They-
changed
The
it.
school
The schools
changed.
still changed.
There was a big discussion.
The select board had a retreat this summer for their goals. They have not formally voted them yet, but I anticipate that that'll happen at this meeting soon, and there is an Indigenous people's goal. So I'll circulate that after they actually vote the document. I'm so
And
sorry.
when-
for getting
Do you know
notification.
how soon that's coming up?
It may be this Tuesday's agenda, but don't hold me to that.
I'm just wondering whether whether anybody here would be appropriate to at least listen in, I don't know. To hear where they're at with that.
You're always welcome to, but I don't think it's necessary, and there's not kind of like a feedback component of this. They had their retreat in August, and the committee, you all had given them feedback prior
Yeah.
to that retreat on the
Right, and
goals, so
we-
that portion's over, and this is more
Yeah, and we had
just
asked
taking the formal vote.
that, that was
Yeah.
one of them.
So I can
Okay.
send you
We'll
the final
follow.
version. Yep.
so do you want me to send this out
Yeah.
now? Or,
Yeah.
okay, and then in some future, point, save it, and at some future time.
That sounds like the perfect way to go.
I think so. I mean, and it's easy reading. It's interesting reading.
Okay.
Lots
Maybe
of
we could
tips.
put it on, I know we have a lot to talk about, but on the agenda to maybe talk about it to like incentivize all of us.
Yeah,
to,
of
like,
course,
actually
yeah.
go and-
Yeah.
Well,
think
I was
you're right.
thinking if we could put parts of it up. We have a screen.
That's
And
a
while
good
we're
idea.
discussing it, we could look at parts of it in case we don't all read through all of it.
Okay, that's great. That's great.
Are there any groups at the high school who have kind of focus on Indigenous people?
Not that I know of, but I'm not totally sure, but I could investigate now to see if there is one or ever has been one, or if there's been an attempt.
Well, maybe, I guess I'm trying to see whether that's something that would be of interest to students. Because we know that the people who are involved, who are now, or the person who's most involved is graduated, but when she did that survey, that there were a lot of students who thought that it should be changed, and that was part of what the school committee was into. If there's some way of tapping into that again.
Okay, I'll tell you that it looks like the 26th is a better date for everybody instead of the 19th. I will just finalize that with everybody.
Okay.
Keith. This is our new,
No,
not yet,
Not for, wrong person.
was he here?
That's Peter O'Neill,
Okay.
from the Observer. I did not see you.
Okay. We have,
He's part of our team, but it's keep the face.
It is.
That's the confusion.
okay, so we interviewed. He, the vote is next week.
Should be on Tuesday, yeah.
Yeah, so I think after next Tuesday, we will have a new member of HRC.
And he wasn't here tonight.
I wasn't paying attention to what was happening behind me.
So do we still have any open spots?
Yes, we do,
One,
one. So. You know anyone?
And Nate is staying on.
I think so, but his time seems to be very limited right now,
oh dear.
so. Motion to adjourn,
So moved.
second, Marlene,
Yes.
Amelia,
Yes.
Jen, Cynthia,
Yes.
Ben,
Yes.
Carrie, I mean.
Yep.
I'm a yes. Thank you, guys.
hi, Linda.
Great, great. Thank you for